They told us to trust the dead drops, the dossiers, the eyes behind the mirror. But no one said what to do when the message had a voice. A real one, dry, unshaken, coming from a speaker wedged into rusted tile in a Berlin subway platform. I wasn't supposed to hear it, not like that. Not that night. Started out like any other operation, until at DIDN single quotes T that they gave me a city, a time zone, and a map with corners that didn't match the real streets. But what kept me alive wasn't on paper. It echoed once a week, always after the 11:47 train, just long enough to mean something, just short enough to sound like nothing. You wouldn't believe me if I told you how many people died for that voice to keep speaking. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. Berlin, October 1973. The U-Bahn kept running. So did the lies. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a test. A harmless phrase buried in the station's routine announcement. Something like, "Attention passengers, the next train to Ruhleben will arrive in 4 minutes. But the cadence, it was off. Too even, too deliberate. Like someone was reading from a page with just one sentence. I'd been stationed in West Berlin for 3 weeks. Officially, I was part of the cultural attache's office, handling archives nobody cared to read. Unofficially, I was there to track signal anomalies feeding out of the U-Bahn system. Someone had been relaying audio clips through the intercom grid, piggybacking them onto scheduled messages. Harmless, they said, until they weren't. The platform at Schlesisches Tor smelled of damp brick and last night's piss. The tiles on the opposite wall were chipped into patterns only bored agents would stare at. But that night, as the 11:47 screeched into view, I froze. Not at the train, at the speaker. The voice, calm, male, not German, American, or someone trying very hard to sound like one. Travelers heading west should avoid the last compartment tonight. It wasn't part of the official schedule. I checked the clipboard clutched under my arm. No note of any compartment warning. And yet, 3 minutes later, 2 men boarded the last car, civilian coats, military shoes. One of them looked right at me, then away. I took the second car instead. 2 stops later, the train halted mid-tunnel. Power flickered. Someone pulled the emergency brake in the rear. I didn't stick around to find out why. I walked the rest of the route back to the safe house, coat soaked, clipboard gone. My handler, McDougal, didn't ask why I was late. He just handed me a cigarette and asked if I'd heard anything interesting underground. That's when I knew he already knew. The next night, I went back. Same platform. Same time. I stood under the same rusted speaker, pretending to read a discarded newspaper. Again, just before the train. Weather in the east remains unstable. Better to keep one's coat on tonight. The paper in my hand? It had a circle drawn in pen. Around a classified ad. Ladies' fur coat, gently used. Pick up only. I didn't believe in coincidences. But I wasn't ready to believe in voices either. By the end of the week, the message shifted again. This time, the speaker crackled. For those seeking transfer, station exits remain unreliable. I stayed on the train that night, despite the warning. 3 men boarded and stood unnaturally still near the doors. One of them had blood on the cuff of his glove. At the next station, they got off. One dropped something in the bin beside me. A key, wrapped in wax paper. I didn't touch it. Not that night. I told McDougal the next morning. He lit a match with a hand that didn't shake and said, "That voice? We think it's real. Keep listening. Don't chase. Don't respond. Just listen. So I did. Every night, I stood in that same spot, waiting to hear what the speaker would say. Not always code. Sometimes just announcements. But once a week, always after the 11:47, it spoke directly to me. The voice never changed. Same inflection, same tempo, almost too consistent. I began recording it with a hidden mic taped inside my coat lining. Played it back at the safe house, slowed it down, speeded up. It didn't glitch. It didn't stutter. Whoever it was, they weren't improvising. They were reading from something scripted, measured, and I started to trust it. That should have been the end of it. But then the elevator door opened. There was a whistle. Low, short, always after the last word of the message. At first, I thought it was a fault in the speaker feedback, maybe. But on the fourth week, it changed pitch, a semitone up, then back down the next night. That was when I started keeping notes, not on what the voice said, but on what it didn't. The cadence wasn't just strange, it was patterned. Keep your coat on tonight always ended with a flat tone. Transfer points unreliable came with a rising chirp. I began associating them with streets I walked the same days. The change in whistle meant something had shifted surveillance patterns, drop zones, even local informant behaviors. The station had become a symphony of espionage. And that voice was the conductor. I didn't know his face, didn't even know if it was always the same man. But the moment the speaker clicked on, I felt a tension in my chest relax, like I was being guided. Not controlled, guided. That was my mistake. The seventh message said, travel delays expected between Merringdam and York Strange. Take alternate routes. I was scheduled for a handoff at Merringdam that evening. I didn't go. The next morning, the operative I was supposed to meet was listed as compromised in the internal report. No body, no names, just compromised. That was the first time I didn't report what I'd heard. The second came soon after. The voice mentioned a construction hazard on line U7, but I'd just been briefed there were no known obstructions. I still diverted course, walked 3 extra kilometers through Kreuzberg in freezing rain. And when I reached the secondary location, someone had left a folded tram ticket in my locker at the archive. On the back, smart move. I never found out who left it. MacDougall wouldn't confirm a thing. He just stared at me with that same half-amused expression he always wore when someone thought they were cleverer than they were. Soon enough, I stopped checking our official briefs first. I started building my days around the voice. Not because I was ordered to, because it worked. Safer routes, cleaner handoffs, fewer shadows. It wasn't loyalty. It was survival. I even began to mimic his intonation in private, reciting messages. In the mirror, like a schoolboy trying to nail a dialect. My paranoia shifted. I didn't fear the Stasi as much anymore. I feared not hearing the voice one night, missing it, like it was a ritual that kept me on the right side of some invisible line. Then came the symbols. Graffiti near Schlesisches Tor started repeating motifs. Curved arrows, half-open eyes, even coordinates in reverse. I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't already tuned into the absurd. But once I saw them, I started tracking when they appeared relative to certain messages. Construction hazard coincided with a triangle painted near the station entrance. Coat on tonight, with an X under the broken escalator. It was coordinated. Someone was walking the same city with a stencil and a can of paint. And a script in hand. And all the while, the voice never acknowledged anything. Not the results of its guidance, not the warnings avoided. It just continued. I stopped reading agency dispatches entirely. MacDougall asked me about one. I lied. He didn't call me out on it, but he did start logging my hours more closely. He knew. He just didn't know what I was listening to. It became personal, not professional. I began to believe the voice wasn't just protecting me, it was choosing me. That I was its node, its vessel, and I was okay with that dot until I heard it say, "Doors closing in 2 minutes. This time, don't. Forget your umbrella." I never carried one, but I turned around anyway, and there it was, leaning against the bench behind me. Black wood handle, same kind my father used, same kind I buried with him. That moment didn't make sense. And back then, I wasn't ready to ask why that we were trained for everything except. For that dot, the voice said, "Passengers transferring to U1 should mind the final step. It's lower than usual." I wrote it down like I always did. But that night, the last step at U1 wasn't any lower, not physically. Nothing had changed on the platform, but something else had. The phrase wasn't quite right. C. For 3 weeks straight, that sentence ended with ... lower than you expect. This time, it was ... lower than usual. Small difference. Tiny. But I'd been trained to catch the difference between a misplaced comma and an act of war. I walked the platform 3 times, expecting a clue. Nothing. Just commuters and gum wrappers and a pair of boots too clean too. Belonged to a Berliner. I didn't engage. I went home. The next morning, we received an informal notice. 2 Stasi operatives had vanished. Not killed, not captured. Gone. No trace. Their last confirmed location? U1, just before the final step. MacDougall didn't ask questions. He just looked at me and said, "Stay sharp." That was his version of concern. The following week, the voice returned to the original phrasing, like nothing had happened, like those 2 agents hadn't vanished, into concrete and silence. That pissed me off more than I'd admit. I waited under the same speaker the next night, watched for any irregularity. The voice delivered its message routine, clean, unremarkable. But as it ended, there was a click. Just one. Not static, mechanical. That click haunted me for days. It didn't happen again. Not in any other announcement. Just once. That same night. So I started testing it. I'd arrive 10 minutes early, sometimes 20. I'd change positions, stand beneath different speakers, even walk the opposite platform to see if the message carried differently. It never did. Always from the same spot. Always with the same timing. One evening, I decided to trigger it myself. I made sure I was the last person on the platform. I slid a coin into the speaker grill. Nothing. I kicked the bass. Still nothing. Then I sat down and whispered, "I know you changed the phrase." The next day, no message. No announcement. No warning. Just silence. I returned every night that week. Still nothing. By day 5, I was sweating through my coat. I hadn't realized how dependent I'd become on that voice. How used I was to hearing it tell me when to duck, when to run, when to stay very still. Then on day 6, it came back. Good. Evening passengers. Remember, some steps take you lower than expected. A hybrid of the old and the altered. A bastardized sentence meant only for me. I laughed, right there on the platform. Out loud, like a lunatic. Someone nearby stared. I ignored them, because I knew now it wasn't a system glitch. It wasn't a rotation error or a maintenance loop. It was a conversation. The voice was watching what I did and responding. Not with answers, not directly, but it noticed. And so, I pushed again. I left a note behind the maintenance panel near the northern exit. Folded paper. No identifiers. Just one question. Are you warning me, or are you warning them? Next evening, the voice said, "Please refrain from placing personal items in restricted areas." I don't know how they found the note so quickly, or if they even read it, but it told me one thing. I wasn't talking to a program. There was a mind behind it. And that mind had rules I didn't understand yet. But in that moment, I still believed I was the only one listening. The message said, for renovations, access to south stairs is prohibited. But that night, the south stairs were open. No tape, no workers. Just dust and an old metal sign half hinged to the wall, as if someone tried to remove it and gave up halfway through. I paused at the base of the steps. A woman walked past me without hesitation, heels clicking. She didn't even glance at the sign. I waited for a second voice to intervene, to contradict the first. Nothing. Just the distant squeal of brakes and the buzz of fluorescent lights. Overhead. I went down. 3 flights below. The tiles changed color, from beige to a yellow that hadn't seen cleaning fluid in years. My shoes stuck slightly to the floor with every step. The hum of electricity faded. I passed an old maintenance locker and a cigarette butt still glowing faintly inside a cracked ashtray. Someone had been here minutes ago. At the bottom, there was a door, unmarked, gray, rust down the hinges like vertical blood. It was slightly ajar. I didn't pull my gun. I wasn't even sure who I'd be aiming at. I pushed it open with my shoulder. Inside, an old storage room, maybe once used for ticket stubs or uniforms. Now empty, except for a wooden crate and a single folding chair. On the chair sat an envelope. Nothing else. No camera. No microphone I could see. Just the envelope, sealed with red wax. Not official. Hand done, like someone wanted it to feel. Dramatic. I opened it. Right there. Inside. A map of Berlin, but not the kind tourists used. This one had the sewer grids marked. Emergency exits. Known surveillance blind spots. And in red pencil, 12 stations circled. The same 12 where I'd received voice messages over the past 3 months. That's when I realized I hadn't chosen my route. I'd been herded. The voice didn't guide me to safety. It had been preparing me for something. Each message had been a rehearsal, a behavioral test. Would I follow? Would I deviate? Could I be counted on to walk into a room like this one, alone? The door behind me creaked. I turned fast, but no one was there. I closed it, locked it from the inside, then sat on the floor, took the map out again. At the bottom corner, there was a scribble. Tiny, almost missed it. Z2 protocol in effect. 14.11. Confirm presence. That wasn't my unit. That wasn't any unit I'd heard of. I memorized the details. Burned the paper with a lighter I hadn't used in months. When I got back to the surface, I took a longer route home. Tried to walk without routine. 3 right turns. 1 left. A cigarette at a stand I'd never used. Anything to break pattern. But I couldn't stop the feeling crawling in my spine. I'd stepped into someone else's operation. That night, I wrote to McDougal anonymously. Asked him if he'd ever heard of Z2. He replied with a single sentence, "Not in our files, but we've seen the results." What the hell does that mean? That's when I realized this might not be a mission anymore. That it might be an audition. And I might already be part of something I never signed up for. But in that moment, I still thought I had a choice. It was the slip that gave him away. Not a confession. Not a reveal. Just a hesitation, tucked between syllables, like a missed cue in a play that everyone's memorized. The voice said, "Trains to Uhlenstrage will depart from platform 3. Please follow." Instructions provided by, then the pause. Half a second, followed by station personnel. But that pause had weight. It wasn't dead air. It was realization. Whoever was speaking forgot they weren't supposed to say their name, and it almost came out. Played the recording back 5 times that night. There was breath in that silence. Human breath. And then I heard it again, barely underneath the word personnel, the beginning of a name. N or N, hard to tell. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It shook me, not because he had a name, but because he made a mistake. That voice had been flawless, coded, cold, measured, until now. Now it trembled. I went back to the station the next day. Same time, same speaker, but no message came. Just the regular transport announcements. As if he'd gone silent, or been silenced. Stood there for over an hour. That was when I noticed him. A man in his 40s. Tan coat, standard briefcase. Standing by the far pillar, not watching me, but not watching either. He left without boarding a train. 2 days later, I saw him again, this time by the kiosk, pretending to read the newspaper. He left when I started walking toward him. I asked McDougal if we had anyone tailing me. He said, if we were, I wouldn't tell you. That meant yes, but not ours. I knew what I had to do. For weeks, I'd relied on that voice without question. Now, I had to track the source. Not the signal, the man. I'd seen enough hints. The timing, the phrasing, even the pauses. It all pointed to someone physically close to the stations. Someone embedded. I started watching station staff, cleaning crews, announcers, security personnel. I'd ride lines I didn't need, sit in empty. Cars follow janitors into side corridors. Then, one night, near Cottbusser Tor, I heard the voice lev. Not through the speaker, not in code. Just a man rehearsing, repeating a line to himself as he adjusted dials behind a service panel. It was him. Gray, at the temples. Posture too rigid for maintenance. His uniform was correct, but the badge had been sewn on by hand. I watched from behind the vending machine. Didn't blink. He said, southbound service will skip this station. Southbound service will skip this station over and over. Testing tone, measuring pace. Then he turned. He didn't see me, but I saw his face. I knew it now. He wasn't ours. His eyes didn't scan like a field man. They scanned like someone who recorded more than he spoke. Someone who made reports, not decisions. That's when it hit me. Every message could have been rewritten. Every warning, every phrase, every pause, deliberate or not, might have been designed to manipulate me, not guide me. I'd trusted him, and he was never mine. I didn't report it, not yet. I needed to understand why, who he was serving, what he wanted from me. But something in me cracked that night. I stopped listening for the voice. I started listening to it. And that's when I started to suspect the truth. Not that they were lying, but that I'd helped them do it. The voice had said, southbound service delayed. Proceed to platform 2 at 22:14 for alternate transport. Simple, precise, like always. I was there 10 minutes early. Platform 2 was nearly empty. Just a man feeding coins into a vending machine and a woman pacing with a stroller that didn't seem to carry anything. I stood at the far edge, facing the tunnel. Every few seconds, I glanced up at the arrival screen, still blinking, still showing 22:14 at 22:15. No train. At 22:16, the screen went blank. No sound, no announcement. Not even that telltale wind you feel when a train's about to round the bend. The man left. The woman disappeared. And I stood there alone for 10 minutes more before accepting it wasn't late. It wasn't coming. I took the stairs up, heart pacing like I'd run. My first instinct was that I'd misheard the time. But I hadn't. I never did. When I got back to the flat, something felt wrong before I even touched the door. The hallway smelled like soap fresh. Someone had cleaned recently, but no one in that building ever did that. I paused outside the door and tapped the knob twice, the way I'd been taught. The sound was off, not hollow. Dampened. I opened it slowly. Nothing was taken. Everything was moved, just slightly. My books on the shelf had shifted by half an inch. A chair faced the wrong angle. A single light bulb above the kitchen table was still warm, like someone had been sitting there, waiting. The worst part? On the glass pane of the window, someone had taped a photo. It was a cutout from a group picture one taken during training years ago. Before Berlin, before everything. I was in the background, laughing, young, unaware. The others in the photo had been cut away. I stared at it for a long time. No message, no threat. Just a memory, cropped and pasted onto my life like a warning that knew where to hurt. I checked every corner of the apartment. No bugs, no signs of forced entry. Nothing useful, except when I pressed the old radio to my ear, I heard static. But not just random static. There was rhythm in it, a pulse. Faint, but deliberate. Morse. I didn't decode it. Not that night. I left the flat and walked for hours. Slept in a church basement where the priest asked no questions. The next morning, I returned like nothing had happened. Replaced the photo with a mirror. Changed the locks. At 22:14 that night, I went back to the station. The speaker crackled alive as I stepped onto the platform. Trains will experience minor delays. Please remain on the platform. But the voice was deeper, more deliberate. No pauses. No whistle. It sounded like the same man, but as if someone else was now reading the lines. Or the same man, under duress. I recorded it, played it back twice before bed. Then I took the photo from the trash and stared at my own younger face again and asked myself something I hadn't dared before. What if I wasn't the target? What if I was the message? But back then, I still believed I was choosing the route. The announcement played like it always did. Northbound service to Pankow departs in 2 minutes. Mind gap. I barely registered it. Routine phrases lose their shape when you hear them often enough. But 3 days later, same station, same time, the voice said, northbound service to Pankow departs in 2 minutes. Watch your step. A different ending. Same voice. Same pace. Different phrase. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't improvisation. It was a reply. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a one-way feed. Someone else had tapped the same system, feeding messages into the same speaker grid. The voice I'd trusted for months wasn't alone anymore. And maybe it never had been. I went back through my tapes, compared similar messages, same locations. Variations started to emerge, not just words, tempo, emphasis. The original voice dragged syllables like a teacher. The new one clipped them like a bureaucrat reading bad news too often. It was subtle, but it was there, and it meant something terrifying. I wasn't just following coded instructions. I was caught between two authors writing the same book, page by page, over my head. That night, the message changed again. Please stand clear of platform edges, eyes forward, feet steady. The day after, please stay away from the edge. Head high, do not move backwards. They were saying the same thing, but not to the same person. The subtext wasn't warning me. It was warning someone else, or worse, challenging them. I stopped sleeping. My notes became obsessive arrows, underlines, graphs of pitch changes, and syntactic rhythms. I spent hours sitting at stations, headphones plugged into a dead recorder, just to look like I wasn't paying attention. McDougal called me in. Sighed I looked like hell. Asked if I'd been drinking again. I said no. He said nothing. Then he handed me a folder. Inside, surveillance photos. Me on the platform. Me writing on a bench. Me entering the stairwell at 2302. I didn't authorize. "This," I said. He looked at me, dry. "I didn't say we took them. There was something else in the folder. A transcript. Handwritten. Phrases I recognized. Messages I'd heard, but this version had lines I never got. Alternate phrasing. Extra lines. As if someone else was hearing another version of the same script. That confirmed it. I wasn't the only recipient, and I might not even be the intended. 1. I went back to the speaker that night with a note. I tucked it behind the bench. It read, "Which one of you is lying? Lying." 2 nights later, the voice said, "Passengers are reminded. Trust official channels only." I repeat, only. But it wasn't the voice I'd known, Dot. It was the other one. He was louder now, pushing back. Tried to triangulate the feed origin. Followed maintenance crews. Monitored power fluctuations. Got nothing. But I knew what I was hearing. A war fought in syntax. A battle between 2 ghosts, both speaking through the same throat. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that was the trap. And that was when I stopped asking who was sending the message and started asking why they chose me to hear it. She worked at the ticket booth. Always the morning shift. Hair pinned tight, uniform crisp, nails chipped from habit. I never paid her much attention. Neither did anyone else. That's what made her dangerous. One Tuesday, just before noon, she stepped out from behind the glass while I was buying a newspaper. Didn't say a word. Slipped an envelope into my coat pocket like she was brushing lint from the fabric. Then she walked away. Inside the envelope, a single line typed on a machine. I recognized from older briefings. Don't trust the voice. No signature, no seal. Just the sentence, centered, clean. I looked up. She was gone. The next day, she wasn't at her post. I waited, checked the rotation chart behind the desk. Her name was still there, Heidman Lee, but the woman behind the glass wasn't her. And she claimed no one by that name had worked there in weeks. That afternoon, I searched the station logs. Backdated maintenance entries, vendor access lists. Her name wasn't on any of them. It was like she'd never existed, but I remembered her. She once offered me a receipt before I even asked. Another time, she pointed out I'd dropped a coin before I noticed. She'd been watching me, Dot, and now she'd vanished. I played back old recordings from the platform. One of them, from 3 weeks prior, caught a sound between announcements barely audible. Footsteps, a cough, then a faint whisper. He's starting to suspect. I'd missed it before. I kept the paper she gave me. Ran chemical tests, nothing. No codes, no fibers linking to known presses. But the phrase stuck. Don't trust the voice. Which one? I returned to Schlesisches Tor and waded through 6 announcements. I heard both voices now. I was sure of it. One gave information. The other gave ... commentary, subtle, disguised, like one was pretending to be the echo of the other. I decided to follow the commentary, the one that warned, the one that paused in just the right places. It led me to a service stairwell I'd never used before. Down 2 flights, a locked gate. I picked it. Inside, a short corridor and a rusted fuse box. On it, etched with a knife, Z2, the same code from the envelope in the abandoned room. I was inside something again. Not sure if it was the same game or a deeper one. That night, the voice said, "Stay warm. The tunnels remember more than they reveal." First time it ever said something like that, I wrote it down anyway. And then I asked myself what I'd refused to until then. Was she really trying to help me? Or was that part of the script too? Maybe she wasn't a warning. Maybe she was bait. But in that moment, I still thought I was decoding messages, not being written into one. The first one was a circle drawn in blue chalk on the side of a bench. Perfect diameter, no smudges. Too clean to be random. It was near the third rail. Entrance on platform 3. That's what caught my attention. The placement. Not decorative, intentional. 2 nights later, another. This time, 2 parallel lines intersected by a curve, like a crude pair of headphones or an open lock. Same chalk. Same bench dot by the end of the week. I counted 5 more. All blue. All on. Or near platform 3 dot at first. I thought it was kids. Art students. Then I saw the 8th one. It was a shape I hadn't seen since Budapest. 67. A modified cipher used to mark safe routes during evacuation drills. We called it the elbow, short for, if you bend here, you live. That symbol wasn't public knowledge. Someone was speaking in a dialect I knew dot, so I replied. I carried white chalk in my coat now. When the platform emptied, I drew a counter symbol and open square with a diagonal slash. Meant, received. Awaiting next. The following night, a response. Triangle with a dot. Danger confirmed. Proceed. That's when I realized the voice had gone quiet. 3 nights. No announcements. No messages. Just mechanical delays and generic warnings. And still, the drawings came. I started seeing them elsewhere, under ticket machines, behind trash bins, once even scrawled on a cardboard coffee sleeve left on a bench. Whoever it was, they moved fast dot, then it escalated. A message in black marker, thick strokes, shaky hand. You're not the only one with chalk. It wasn't a threat, that it was a warning. I scanned it for prints. Found none. But I recognized the handwriting dot. It matched a log entry I'd once read in a report labeled Z2 Candidate Disposition. The file had been redacted, but the penmanship was. Left intact on a marginal note, monitor for deviation. They'd been watching me longer than I knew. I started testing them. One night, I drew a broken arrow symbol for false lead. No response dot next time. I drew the elbow again. Upside down code for infiltration suspected. The reply came not in chalk, but over the speaker. Please do not modify official markings. Surveillance is active. The voice was back, but now it was reacting to the walls. Not to me dot. It knew I was talking back, and it didn't like it. I tried to track the chalk trail to its source. I followed symbols into dead-end corridors, locked kiosks, janitor closets that hadn't been used in months. Nothing. But the voice kept adapting, mimicking the symbols in its phrases. One night it said, mind the square. Stay inside the line. I drew a circle, small, deliberate dot the next night. Circles imply danger. Do not engage. I wasn't decoding anymore. I was arguing. And then the drawing stopped dot. No more blue chalk dot. Just one final message on the wall behind platform 3. Written in red. You failed the test. I stood there for an hour. No train came. And that's when I started to wonder who exactly was. Testing who? It was supposed to be a simple transfer and envelope pickup from a contact at the French consulate. No surveillance, no tail, just a handoff. But the contact never showed. Instead, I got a call at the safe house. A low voice said, Locker 12B. Hauptbahnhof. You'll want gloves. The voice didn't identify itself. Didn't need to. I was at Hauptbahnhof within the hour. Inside locker 12B. A worn manila folder. Damp at the corners. No markings outside. I opened it in a public washroom. Door locked. Coat over the sink dot inside. File 314. Marked in Cyrillic, but retranslated into German. Stamped KGB. Cross-reference tag. Z2 dot. It was a surveillance file. On me? No. On the voice dot name. Eric Janish. Alias. Multiple. One listed as harem. Occupation: civil maintenance subcontractor for transit systems, Berlin sector. Clearance: none. But the file painted a different picture. Janisch had been planted in West Berlin in 1968, originally part of a joint propaganda testing unit. His mission: infiltrate civilian auditory networks, public radio, educational broadcasts, then eventually public address systems. His tool: modulation messaging, voice-based conditioning. In other words, the subway voice was enemy craft. The dates lined up too perfectly. The first voice message I heard at Schlesisches Tor logged in their report as initial penetration test successful. My redirections, my delays, they were all itemized. Results noted. Behavior shifts documented. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't a rogue ally. It was architecture. I was the structure they were testing. And worse, I had responded exactly as expected. The clincher? Near the end of the file. A line that froze me. Subject 12 shows signs of full compliance. Final phase approved. Phrase rotation to initiate misdirection protocol. That phrase was the one that changed weeks ago. The one I dismissed as a fluke. I wasn't a victim of false information. Was a participant in its deployment. The file had copies of audio logs, exact transcriptions of the messages, each tied to an intended psychological effect: caution, dependency, paranoia, redirection, isolation. They were building an operative inside my head, and I let them. I destroyed the file immediately, burned it in a barrel behind the tram depot. But it was too late. I couldn't unknow it. The voice had known my patterns, my history. It hadn't led me. It had tailored itself to me. Every symbol, every whisper, every silence. Constructed, controlled, confirmed. I told McDougal none of it. He was already suspecting too much. That night, I stood on platform 3. The speaker came alive. Passengers for Ruhleben, please remain calm. Service will resume shortly. But the voice didn't pause this time. It said, we hope the test results were satisfactory. Then it clicked off. I didn't move for a long time. And that was the night I realized the mission hadn't started when I arrived in Berlin. It started when I listened. The tunnel entrance was half concealed behind a stack of disused cleaning carts in a section of the U-Bahn, no longer marked on any schedule. Sudstern, Line 7, maintenance access. The gate had no lock, just rust and old fingerprints. I didn't get the location from the voice. I got it from a transit map. One printed in 1942. It had an access corridor no longer present in modern blueprints, yet still visible in satellite thermal scans we'd intercepted 2 years prior. It was faint, but warm. I carried a torch. 3 minutes in, the smell changed, from dust and mold to air that had moved recently. The walls narrowed. Red brick turned to concrete. I passed a row of bolted fuse panels, one labeled simply Z2 Rucklauf. I'd seen that label before. In the file I burned, the hallway ended in a bend tight, unnatural, forced around something that used to be there. At the corner, a door, iron, old. I knocked. It opened from inside. The man who let me in looked older than I expected. Late 60s, maybe more. Beard, civilian clothes, but the posture of someone who hadn't stopped scanning his environment in 30 years. He didn't introduce himself, didn't need to. He motioned to a table with a half-drunk thermos of coffee and a stack of notebooks labeled only with dates. He said one sentence. You weren't supposed to make it this far. We sat. He spoke first. Told me he'd been stationed in Berlin since the mid-50s. Originally fieldwork. Later, internal monitoring. Then, something darker. He'd been tasked with watching the watchers. Specifically, anyone using auditory pathways. For manipulation, what they called ecosystems. His job was to map influence corridors. Who listened? Who obeyed? Who repeated? He showed me logs, pages of them. Names I recognized. Mine was there. Under controlled exposure stage 3, I asked about Jenish. He nodded, said he'd been tracking him since 1969, and he said, the thing I didn't want to hear. We never knew which side he really worked for. I laughed. Dry, bitter. Said that sounded about right. He didn't smile. He handed me an envelope. Inside, a photo, grainy, dated, taken from above one of those mirror in the ceiling surveillance shots. It was me, on platform 3. Chalk in hand. And standing 3 meters behind me was the woman from the ticket booth. The one who disappeared, one who told me not to trust the voice. She was part of this too? I asked. He looked tired, said, we're all part of this, even now. Then came the part that froze me. He slid a recorder across the table, played a segment. It was the voice, the one I thought I knew. The familiar tone, the timing, the weight. Now it ended with a question. Has Subject 12 begun recording independently? That was weeks before I ever taped a message, which meant they knew. They always knew. The man looked at me with something close to pity. They weren't testing the system, kid. They were testing you. And that was when I realized I might have passed their test, but I'd failed mine. I left Berlin in winter. Not officially. No report, no final debrief. Just a letter slid under MacDougall's door, and a return flight I didn't book myself. I spent the next decade pretending none of it mattered. Bought a house, learned to cook, stopped using aliases, started forgetting names on purpose. For a while, it worked. Then last spring, in a thrift store in Oslo, I found a box of old cassette tapes, labeled in marker. German transit recordings. Some hobbyist collector's archive. I bought them without thinking, just to see. That night, in a borrowed tape deck, I played the first one, and there it was. The voice. Not exactly. The tape was older, tinny, filtered, but I knew it. The same rhythm, the same artificial calm. Please stand back. Service delays expected. I played it again. Then, again. Not for the message, for the silence afterward, because I swear, just before the tape stopped, there was a click. Not from the deck, from the recording itself. Like a throat-clearing. It was real. I stood in that living room, older, slower, with no missions left to ruin, and I felt the same tension I had back then. That same sensation that someone was still talking to me. Or through me. I brought the tape to a friend who owed me favors. He analyzed the waveform, found a buried frequency non-audible to most humans, some kind of low-pulse carrier. Said it looked familiar, like the things they used in training videos to keep subjects alert without knowing why. I laughed, almost cried. Then I burned the tape, but the voice stayed. I hear it sometimes, when the kettle starts to boil, or when the bus doors hiss open. Not the words, just the shape, the tone. Sometimes I answer, under my breath. No one's listening. Not anymore, except maybe me. Because in the end, the mission wasn't to decode anything. It was to remember. And now, that's all I have left. And sometimes, when the station's empty, I still look up, waiting for a message that was never mine. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this.